Chapter 1. The Melody in the Fog. The fog had settled over St. Mary Mead like a thick grey shawl, muffling the usual chatter of the village and casting the cottages in a dreamy haze. Jane Marple sat by her window, her knitting needles clicking softly, though her hands paused more often than usual. It wasn't the weather that distracted her, it was the sound. A faint, lilting melody drifted through the mist, carried on the damp air like a whisper from another time. She tilted her head, her sharp eyes narrowing behind her spectacles. It was a tune she hadn't heard in years, one she couldn't quite place, yet it tugged at the edges of her memory with an almost insistent pull. "Curious," she murmured to herself, setting her knitting aside. She rose, her movements deliberate despite the slight stiffness in her knees, and stepped closer to the window. The notes were clearer now, plaintive, melancholic, played on a piano with a touch both skilled and hesitant. It wasn't coming from Mrs. Price's cottage, where the local children banged out scales with more enthusiasm than talent. Nor was it from the vicarage, where the organist practiced hymns with predictable regularity. No, this was something else entirely. Miss Marple pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and opened the front door, letting the cool air sweep in. The fog swallowed the garden path, but the music grew sharper, beckoning her toward the lane. She hesitated only a moment. After all, curiosity had always been her vice. Before stepping out, her sensible shoes tapping lightly on the cobblestones. The village was eerily quiet, the fog dampening even the usual clatter of teacups from Mrs. Bantry's tea circle. But the tune persisted, weaving through the stillness like a thread of silver. Miss Marple followed it, her mind already turning over possibilities. A new tenant at the old Grayson cottage, perhaps, or someone visiting the Hendersons. She'd heard no gossip about a musician, and St. Mary Mead was not a place where secrets, musical or otherwise, stayed hidden long. As she rounded the corner near the post office, the music stopped abruptly, leaving only the drip of condensation from the eaves. Miss Marple stood still, listening. A door creaked somewhere ahead, followed by the soft shuffle of footsteps retreating into the fog. She pursed her lips, a flicker of unease mingling with her curiosity. That tune. It wasn't just familiar. It was wrong. A memory flickered, faint as the mist itself. A drawing room long ago, a young woman's laughter, and that same melody, underscoring a moment of sudden, inexplicable tension. "Jane, you're imagining things," she chided herself, though she didn't believe it. She turned back toward home, the silence now heavier than the fog. But as she walked, a single note rang out behind her, a sharp, deliberate strike on the piano, like a challenge or a warning. She didn't turn around this time. Instead, she smiled faintly. "Very well," she said under her breath. "Let's see what you're hiding." By the time she reached her cottage, the fog had thickened, but her mind was clear. Something was stirring in St. Mary Mead, and that forgotten tune was at the heart of it. She settled back into her chair, picked up her knitting, and began to hum the melody softly, piecing together the first threads of a mystery she couldn't yet name. Chapter 2. The Pianist's Shadow. The next morning, the fog had lifted, leaving St. Mary Mead bathed in a crisp April light that made the dew on the roses glisten. Miss Marple was up early, as was her habit, sipping tea and glancing out her window with a keen eye. The village was stirring now. Mr. Higgs trundling his milk cart down the lane, Mrs. Bantry's voice carrying from her garden as she scolded her terrier. But Miss Marple's thoughts were still on that tune, its notes lingering like an unwelcome guest. She hadn't long to wait for a distraction. At 9:30, there was a brisk knock at her door. She opened it to find Lucy, her young housemaid, standing there with a basket of eggs and a gleam of excitement in her eyes. "Morning, Miss Marple," Lucy said, bustling in without preamble. "You'll never guess who's taken the Grayson cottage. A real stranger. Arrived last night, they say, with a trunk and a piano strapped to a lorry. Mrs. Price saw it all from her window. A piano, you say?" Miss Marple's tone was mild, but her interest sharpened. "That's rather unusual for a short let." "Oh, he's not short-term, least not by the look of it," Lucy replied, setting the eggs on the table. "Mrs. Price says he's a tall sort, all in black, with a hat pulled low. Kept to himself, didn't even nod when she waved, and that piano, he had it hauled straight in, like it was worth more than gold." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her fingers tapping the rim of her teacup. "And his name? Mr. Vincent, they're calling him. No one's sure of more than that yet. Keeps the curtains drawn, too." Lucy leaned in, lowering her voice. "Do you think he's hiding something, miss?" "Most people are, in one way or another," Miss Marple said with a small smile. "But a piano's an odd thing to hide behind. Thank you, Lucy. Keep an ear out, won't you?" Lucy bobbed her head and hurried off, leaving Miss Marple to her thoughts. Mr. Vincent. A newcomer with a piano and a taste for privacy. It wasn't proof, of course, but the coincidence was too neat to ignore. She decided a stroll was in order, purely for the air, naturally. The Grayson cottage sat at the edge of the village, a squat little place with ivy creeping up its walls. As Miss Marple approached, she noted the drawn curtains Lucy had mentioned, though a sliver of light escaped one window. She paused, pretending to admire a patch of daisies, when the faint sound of that tune drifted out again. Slower this time, almost mournful. Her heart quickened. There it was, unmistakable. The music stopped as abruptly as before, and the front door swung open. A man stepped out, tall, as Lucy had said, dressed in a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He carried a small leather case, and his movements were quick, purposeful. He glanced her way, and for a moment their eyes met. His were a pale grey, sharp and assessing, but he offered no greeting, only a curt nod before striding off toward the village centre. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind buzzing. "A man who plays but doesn't wish to be heard," she murmured, "and yet he can't resist the keys." She turned back toward home, but not before catching a glimpse through that sliver of open curtain. Inside the piano gleamed, a grand polished thing, far too fine for a cottage rental. And on its lid sat a single sheet of music, yellowed with age, its title obscured by distance. She filed the image away, along with the man's guarded glance. By midday, the village was abuzz with whispers about Mr. Vincent. Mrs. Bantry rang up, her voice crackling through the line. "Jane, have you seen him? Looks like a ghost, if you ask me. Dolly says he asked the postmaster for a lock on his mailbox. Imagine that." "Very practical," Miss Marple replied, her tone dry, "though I wonder what he's so keen to protect." "Oh, you're impossible," Mrs. Bantry laughed. "Come to tea tomorrow. I'll have the whole story by then." Miss Marple agreed, but as she hung up, her gaze drifted to the window. The pianist's shadow had fallen over St. Mary Mead, and with it that tune. Haunting, familiar, and now tied to a stranger who seemed to carry more than just a melody in his wake. Chapter 3. Echoes of a Crime. The peace of St. Mary Mead shattered just before dawn the next day. Miss Marple was roused from a light sleep by the distant wail of a siren. A rare sound in the village, where the most pressing emergencies were usually a lost cat or a dispute over prize marrows. She rose, peering through her curtains as the sky blushed pink, and saw the flashing lights of a police car flickering near the Grayson cottage. "Dear me," she said softly, already reaching for her dressing gown. Trouble had arrived, and she suspected it hadn't come alone. By the time she dressed and made her way down the lane, a small crowd had gathered. Mrs. Price clutching her shawl, Mr. Higgs still in his milkman's apron, and Lucy wide-eyed at the edge of the group. Inspector Craddock, a familiar face from past village misadventures, stood by the cottage gate, his expression grim. Miss Marple approached quietly, catching his eye. "Miss Marple," he greeted, tipping his hat. "I suppose I shouldn't be surprised to see you." "Nor I you, Inspector," she replied, her tone gentle but probing. "What's happened?" Craddock sighed, glancing back at the cottage. "A man's been found dead inside. Stabbed, looks like. One clean wound to the chest. We're still sorting out who he is. Papers say he's a Mr. Harold Grayson. But that's odd, seeing as this place has been rented out for years." "Grayson?" Miss Marple's brows lifted slightly. "The family name, perhaps. And Mr. Vincent." "Gone," Craddock said curtly. "Door was unlocked, piano still there, but no sign of him. Looks like he cleared out in a hurry." Miss Marple nodded, her gaze drifting to the cottage. The crowd murmured, speculation rippling through like wind over water. She slipped past them, catching Lucy's arm. "Was there anything else last night, Lucy? Any sound?" Lucy frowned, thinking. "Well, miss, I did hear that piano again. Late, maybe midnight, stopped sudden-like, then nothing. I thought he'd just gone to bed." "Thank you, dear," Miss Marple said, patting her hand. She turned back to the scene, her mind whirring. A murder, a missing pianist, and that tune cut short. It was no coincidence. Craddock allowed her a brief look inside, under the pretence of fetching a dropped handkerchief, though both knew it was a flimsy excuse. The cottage was tidy, save for the body sprawled near the fireplace. Harold Grayson, if that was his name, was a stout man in his 50s, his face frozen in surprise, a letter-opener protruding from his chest. The piano stood silent, its lid closed, but the sheet of music Miss Marple had glimpsed was gone. "Anything catch your eye?" Craddock asked, watching her closely. "Only what's missing," she said cryptically, stepping back outside. She didn't mention the tune, not yet. It was too early to weave that thread into the tapestry. By noon, the village was a hive of gossip. Mrs. Bantry arrived at Miss Marple's cottage, breathless with news. "Jane, it's ghastly. They say this Grayson chap turned up yesterday, demanding to see Vincent. Mr. Higgs overheard them arguing at the gate, something about money and a promise broken years ago. Did he now?" Miss Marple poured tea, her calm unshaken. "And what of the piano. Dolly says Vincent was playing it when Grayson barged in last night. Then it went quiet, until the screaming started, I suppose. Mrs. Bantry shivered. What do you make of it? Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant. I think that tune has more to say than we've heard. It's not just a song, Dolly. It's a witness. Mrs. Bantry blinked. You're being mysterious again, Jane. A witness? How? But Miss Marple only smiled. Give it time, dear. The echoes of a crime don't fade so easily. As Mrs. Bantry chattered on, Miss Marple's thoughts drifted back to the melody. Its halting rhythm, its mournful lilt. It had stopped twice now, once in the fog and once before a murder. She hummed it softly, and for the first time a name surfaced in her memory. Clara. A girl from long ago, tied to that song and to a scandal buried deep. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture was still blurred. And where, she wondered, had Mr. Vincent gone with that missing sheet of music? Chapter 4. Whispers in the Attic. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows of Miss Marple's cottage, casting long shadows across the parlour floor. She sat with her knitting untouched, her mind too restless for the rhythm of needles. The Hugh murder of Harold Grayson and Mr. Vincent's disappearance had set St. Mary Mead abuzz. But Miss Marple knew the answers lay not in the chatter of the village, but in the quiet corners where secrets lingered. She rose, smoothing her skirt, and made her way to the attic. It was a place she rarely visited. Dusty, cluttered with the relics of a life well lived, but something tugged at her, a memory tied to that tune. Clara. The name had surfaced like a pebble breaking the surface of a still pond, and with it came a faint recollection of a scandal from decades past, one she'd heard in passing as a young woman. A music sheet, she thought. If there was anything to find, it would be here, among the forgotten things. The attic stairs creaked under her careful steps, and the air grew thick with the scent of old paper and lavender. She lit a small lamp, its glow illuminating trunks and boxes stacked haphazardly. She began with a wooden chest near the window, its lid groaning as she lifted it. Inside were letters, photographs, and a few brittle programs from village concerts long ago. Her fingers brushed a yellowed sheet of music, and her breath caught. It was titled Clara's Lament, the notes handwritten in a delicate looping script. The melody matched the one she'd heard, haunting, precise, with a strange syncopated pause in the middle, as if the composer had hesitated mid-thought. At the bottom, a dedication to C.L. with regret, 1898. She traced the ink, her mind racing. Clara Langston. That was the name. A girl from a neighbouring village, engaged to a wealthy man until she vanished after a public row. The scandal had faded, but the tune, it seemed, had not. Regret? Miss Marple murmured. What did you regret, I wonder? She tucked the sheet into her pocket and continued searching, her curiosity now a steady flame. In a tin box beneath a pile of shawls, she found a clipping from an old newspaper dated 1899. The headline read, Langston heiress presumed dead. Fiancé cleared of suspicion. The article spoke of Clara's disappearance after a concert where she'd played the piano. Her fiancé, a Mr. Harold Grayson, claiming she'd run off with another man. No body was found, and the case withered into rumour. Miss Marple sat back on her heels, the pieces clicking into place. Harold Grayson, the dead man, shared the name of Clara's fiancé. A descendant, perhaps. And Mr. Vincent, with his piano and that tune, what was his connection? She hummed Clara's lament again, and the pause in the melody struck her anew. It wasn't hesitation, it was a signal. A break meant to mean something. She descended the attic stairs, the music sheet and clipping in hand, just as Lucy burst through the front door, her face flushed. "Miss Marple, you'll never believe it. They've found blood on the piano keys, hidden under the lid. Inspector Craddock's beside himself." "Blood?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "How interesting! And the music sheet? Still missing, miss. But there's more. Mrs. Price saw Mr. Vincent last night, slipping out the back with that leather case of his. She swears he looked right at her, then vanished into the woods." Miss Marple nodded, her calm unshaken. "Thank you, Lucy. Fetch my coat, will you? I think it's time I paid Inspector Craddock a visit." As Lucy scurried off, Miss Marple studied the music sheet again. The notes whispered to her, not just of Clara's fate, but of a crime echoing through time. Vincent had taken the sheet from the cottage. Why? To hide it or to use it? And that blood on the keys, was it Grayson's or a trace of something older? She slipped the clipping into her handbag and hummed the tune once more. The Attics, whispers now a chorus in her mind. The past was speaking, and she intended to listen. Chapter 5. The Masked Recital. By evening, St. Mary Mead had settled into an uneasy hum, the murder casting a shadow over its usual cheer. The village hall, however, glowed with light and chatter, for the annual spring recital was underway, a tradition too stubborn to bow to tragedy. Miss Marple arrived just as the lamps were lit, her handbag clutched tightly, the music sheet and clipping tucked inside. She'd persuaded Inspector Craddock to let her observe, promising only to watch and listen. He'd agreed, albeit with a sceptical grunt. The hall was packed, Mrs. Bantry in a peacock feather hat, Mr. Higgs fidgeting in a stiff collar, and a dozen others craning for a glimpse of the performers. The programme was simple. Local talent, a few songs, and a piano piece to close. Miss Marple took a seat near the back, her eyes scanning the crowd. Vincent was still missing, but she hadn't come for him. Not yet. The recital began with a shaky rendition of Greensleeves by young Tommy Price, followed by Mrs. Henderson's warbling soprano. Miss Marple applauded politely, but her attention sharpened when the final act was announced. A masked pianist, a last-minute addition, playing an original composition. A murmur rippled through the room. Intrigue laced with unease, the figure stepped onto the stage, tall and cloaked in black, a plain white mask obscuring their face. The hat was gone, but the silhouette was unmistakable. Miss Marple's lips twitched. "Mr. Vincent, I presume," she whispered to herself. The pianist sat at the village hall's old upright, flexing gloved hands before striking the keys. The tune began, soft, tentative, then swelling into Clara's lament. The crowd stilled, caught by its melancholy beauty, but Miss Marple leaned forward, her heart quickening. The pause came, that strange break in the rhythm, and Vincent lingered on it, drawing it out longer than she'd heard before. It wasn't just a pause, it was a confession, a plea woven into the notes. Halfway through, A string snapped inside the piano with a sharp twang, jolting the audience. Vincent faltered, hands freezing above the keys. A woman near the front, Mrs. Price, gasped loudly, clutching her chest. "That's it!" she cried. "That's what I heard the night Grayson died." A snap, then silence. The room erupted, in whispers, heads turning toward Vincent. He rose abruptly, the mask slipping slightly, to reveal a flash of pale grey eyes. Miss Marple caught it, her suspicion hardening into certainty. He moved for the side door, but Craddock, stationed there, stepped forward. "Not so fast," the inspector said, voice firm. "We've got questions, Mr. Vincent, or whoever you are." Vincent froze, then turned, his posture rigid. "I've nothing to say," he replied, his voice low, clipped with an accent Miss Marple couldn't quite place. "I only came to play." "And a fine performance it was," Miss Marple interjected, standing. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were steel. "Though I wonder why you chose that tune. It's not yours, is it? It belongs to Clara Langston, and to a story you seem to know well." The crowd hushed, all eyes on Vincent. His gloved hand twitched toward his coat pocket, where a corner of yellowed paper peeked out, the missing music sheet. Craddock noticed it too, stepping closer, but Vincent bolted, shoving past him and out into the night. "After him!" Craddock barked, and 2 constables gave chase, their boots pounding the floorboards. Miss Marple remained where she was, unruffled. Mrs. Bantry rushed to her side, breathless. "Jane, was that him, the killer?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her gaze distant. "Or perhaps he's running from something else." "That's string-breaking. It wasn't an accident. It's a clue, Dolly, just like the pause in the tune." "What do you mean?" Mrs. Bantry pressed, but Miss Marple only patted her arm. "Patience, dear. The mask is off, but the truth is still playing its part." Outside shouts echoed as the constables lost Vincent in the woods. Miss Marple sat back down, humming Clara's lament softly. The recital had ended in chaos, but for her it was merely an interlude. Vincent had slipped away, but he'd left behind more than he realized, and she intended to find it. Chapter 6. Threads of the Past. The morning after the recital dawned grey and restless, a fine drizzle pattering against the windows of Miss Marple's cottage. She sat by the fire, Clara's lament spread out on the table before her, its ink faded but its secrets vivid. Vincent's flight had confirmed his role in the mystery, but the why and how remained tangled threads she was determined to unravel. The past, she knew, held the key, and it was time to tug at those threads. She began with the newspaper clipping from the attic, rereading the sparse details of Clara Langston's disappearance. The fiancé, Harold Grayson, had been a man of means, a landowner with a temper, according to village law. Clara, an heiress and a gifted pianist, had vanished after a concert in 1898, leaving behind whispers of betrayal and a broken engagement. The article hinted at a rival suitor, but no name was given. Miss Marple tapped her finger on the page, frowning. "A rival?" she murmured. "Or a rescuer?" Her next move was a visit to the vicarage. Reverend Clement, a kindly man with a passion for local history, kept records that stretched back centuries. She found him in his study, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers, a cup of tea cooling at his elbow. "Miss Marple, what a surprise!" he said, peering over his spectacles. I suppose it's about the Grayson business." "In a way," she replied, settling into a chair. "I'm more interested in the past, 1898 to be precise. The Langston family, and a certain Harold Grayson." Clement's brows rose, but he nodded, pulling a volume from the shelf. "Let's see, Langston, you say? Ah, here we are. Clara Langston, born 1875, only child of Edward Langston. Engaged to Harold Grayson in 97, but it fell apart. She disappeared the next year, poor girl. The Graysons owned half the county then. Harold was the eldest son." "And the concert?" Miss Marple pressed. "Anything unusual?" Clement flipped a page, squinting. Yes, there's a note. St. Mary Mead hosted a charity recital that summer. Clara played, and it says here a visiting musician joined her for a duet. No name, but there was a row afterward. Grayson stormed out, and Clara was gone by morning." "A duet," Miss Marple echoed, her mind sparking. "And the tune?" "No mention of it, I'm afraid. But the vicar at the time wrote she'd composed something new. A lament, he called it. Said it moved the room to tears." Miss Marple thanked him and left, the drizzle soaking her shawl as she walked home. A duet, a visiting musician. The pieces were aligning, but Vincent's place in them was still a shadow. She suspected he wasn't Clara's killer. Time didn't allow it. But perhaps he was tied to her fate, or to Grayson's revenge. Back at her cottage, Lucy arrived with fresh gossip. "Miss, they've found Vincent's leather case in the woods near the old mill. Empty, save for a locket with a woman's picture inside. Inspector Craddock's got it now." "A locket?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Did you see the picture?" "No, miss, but Mrs. Price says it's old. Victorian. Like blonde hair, sad eyes." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing. Clara, perhaps, or someone else from that tangled past. She fetched her copy of Clara's Lament and studied the dedication again. To C.L., with regret. Not Clara herself, then, but who? The rival suitor? The duet partner? That afternoon she rang Mrs. Bantry. "Dolly, do you recall your great-aunt's stories about the Graysons? Anything about Clara Langston?" Mrs. Bantry hummed thoughtfully. "Well, Aunt Edith did say Clara had a secret beau, a musician from London, poor as a church mouse, but mad for her. Grayson caught them together once, nearly beat the man senseless. Aunt Edith swore Clara ran off with him, but no one ever proved. It his name?" Miss Marple asked, holding her breath. "Vincent something or other. Can't recall the rest. Why?" Miss Marple smiled faintly. "Just tying a knot, dear. Thank you." She hung up, the threads of the past tightening. A Vincent in 1898, and a Vincent now. A family legacy, perhaps. A grandson seeking answers or vengeance. The locket, the tune, the blood on the keys. It all pointed to Clara's story, echoing into the present. But why kill Harold Grayson? And what had Vincent taken from that music sheet? As the rain tapped the roof, Miss Marple hummed Clara's Lament. The pause in the melody now a question she was close to answering. The past wasn't done with. St. Mary Mead, and neither was she. Chapter 7. The Silent Witness. The drizzle had softened into a fine mist by midday, cloaking St. Mary Mead in a stillness that felt expectant, as if the village itself were holding its breath. Miss Marple sat at her kitchen table, a pot of tea steaming beside her, the locket's description from Lucy turning over in her mind. A blonde woman with sad eyes, Clara Langston, almost certainly. But the silent witness to this mystery wasn't the locket, nor even the tune itself. It was someone closer, someone overlooked. She glanced out the window, her gaze settling on the figure trudging up the lane. Old Tom, the village handyman, his cap pulled low against the damp. Tom was a fixture in St. Mary Mead, quiet, weathered, with hands that could fix anything from a leaky roof to a broken gate. He'd been a boy in 1898, she realized, and his family had lived near the Grayson estate. If anyone had seen something back then, it might be him. Miss Marple stepped outside, waving him over with a smile. "Tom, do spare me a moment. A cup of tea, perhaps?" He hesitated, then nodded, wiping his boots on the mat. "Right kind of you, miss." They sat by the fire, the crackle of logs filling the silence as she poured. She let him settle, sipping his tea before steering the conversation. "Tom, you've lived here all your life, haven't you? You must remember the old days. The Graysons, Clara Langston?" Tom's cup paused midway to his lips, his rheumy eyes flickering with something, memory or unease. "Aye, miss, long time ago. Clara was a bright thing, played the piano like an angel. Shame what happened." "What did happen, Tom?" she asked gently, leaning forward. "You were there, weren't you?" He stared into the fire, his gnarled hands tightening around the cup. "I was 12. Worked odd jobs for the Graysons, fetching, coal, sweeping the stables. Night she went missing. I saw her at the hall, playing that tune. Lament, they called it. Afterward, I was by the gate when Mr. Grayson came storming out, red as a beet. Shouting at her, he was, called her a traitor. And then, Miss Marple prompted, her voice soft but insistent. Tom shifted, glancing at the door as if expecting someone to barge in. She weren't alone. A man was with her, tall, dark-haired, carrying a fiddle case. They argued too, quiet-like, then walked off toward the woods. I heard Grayson yell after 'em, "Vincent, you'll pay for this!" But they didn't turn back. "Vincent," Miss Marple repeated, her pulse quickening. "Did you see them again?" Tom shook his head. "Not Clara. Next day she was gone. Grayson said she'd run off, but I saw blood, miss. The mill path, near the stream. Just a smear, but it weren't there before. I told me dad, but he said to hush. Grayson'd have our necks if we talked." Miss Marple sat back, her mind weaving Tom's words into the pattern. Blood on the mill path, a Vincent in the past, and now a Vincent fleeing with Clara's locket. And the man with the fiddle case, did he ever return? "Dunno, miss. But years later, must have been 20 or so, I saw a lad in the village, looked just like him, same grey eyes, asked me if the mill still stood. I said aye, and he nodded like it meant something. Never saw him again. Thank you, Tom," she said, her tone warm but firm. "You've been most helpful." He finished his tea and shuffled out, leaving her alone with the fire's glow. The silent witness had spoken, and his words painted a picture. Clara and her Vincent fleeing Grayson's rage, blood marking their escape. Had Vincent, the first, killed her in a lover's quarrel, or had Grayson caught them? And why had his descendant returned to settle the score? That afternoon, Inspector Craddock rang. Miss Marple, we've traced the locket, engraved inside CL to JV forever. Mean anything to you?" "Quite a lot," she replied, smiling faintly. "J. Vincent, I'd wager, Clara's duet partner, and perhaps our Mr. Vincent's grandfather." Craddock grunted. "You're ahead of me again. We've got men at the mill now. Found a knife buried near the stream, old but sharp. Could be the murder weapon from Grayson's killing." "Or from Clara's," Miss Marple said softly. "Check the blade, Inspector. It may have more than one story to tell." She hung up, humming Clara's Lament. Tom's memory had lit a lantern in the dark, but the shadows were still deep. Vincent, the modern one, was no random killer. He was chasing a ghost, and Harold Grayson's death was the echo of a crime long buried. The mill held the next clue, and she intended to be there when it surfaced. Chapter 8. The Tune's Confession. The old mill stood at the edge of St. Mary Mead, its wheel long stilled, its stones moss-covered and crumbling. By late afternoon, the mist had thickened again, curling around the scene as Inspector Craddock's men combed the muddy banks of the stream. Miss Marple arrived with Mrs. Bantry in tow. Dolly had insisted on coming, her curiosity outweighing her nerves. They stood under an umbrella, watching as a constable unearthed the knife Tom's tale had hinted at. A rusted blade, its handle carved with faint initials. "J.V. Jane, you're uncanny," Mrs. Bantry whispered, clutching her arm. "How did you know?" "I didn't," Miss Marple replied, her eyes on the knife. "But the past has a way of leaving its mark." Craddock approached, holding the blade in a cloth. Old, but well preserved. Blood traces on it. Too degraded to say whose, but it's been used. Could be Grayson's from the other night or something older. And we found this nearby. He held up a crumpled scrap of paper, yellowed and torn. The missing music sheet from Vincent's piano. The title was intact, Clara's Lament, but the notes were smeared with mud. Miss Marple took it, her fingers careful. "May I?" She studied the page, humming the tune softly. That pause again. It nagged at her, a rhythm broken by intent. Then she saw it. Faint pencil marks in the margin. A scrawl in a modern hand. He lied. The mill knows. "Vincent's writing?" Craddock asked, peering over her shoulder. "Perhaps," she said. "Or a warning he left for us to find." Search continued, but Vincent remained elusive. Miss Marple returned home, the music sheet and knife's image fixed in her mind. She spread her copy of Clara's Lament beside the torn one, comparing them. The pause was identical, but Vincent's version had an extra note after it. A sharp, discordant strike, like the snapped string at the recital. A confession, she thought, or an accusation. That evening, a breakthrough came. Craddock arrived at her cottage, his face taut with urgency. "We've got him, Miss Marple. Vincent, cornered in a barn near Much Benham. He's asking for you. Me?" She raised an eyebrow, but her surprise was fleeting. "Very well. Let's hear what he has to say." The barn was a mile out, its roof sagging, hay bales stacked haphazardly inside. Vincent sat on one, hands cuffed, his mask gone, but his grey eyes still piercing. He looked younger than she'd expected, mid-30s, with a gauntness that spoke of sleepless nights. The locket hung around his neck, glinting in the lantern light. "Mr. Vincent, Miss Marple began, her voice steady. "Or should I say, Mr. John Vincent, grandson of Clara's John?" He flinched, then nodded. "You've done your homework, old woman." "I've listened," she corrected, "to your tune and to the past. Why did you kill Harold Grayson?" Vincent's jaw tightened. He deserved it. His grandfather killed Clara, my grandfather's love. I found the truth in John's letters, hidden in our family attic. Grayson caught them at the mill, stabbed her with that knife, buried her there. John saw it all, too late to save her. He wrote Clara's lament for her, that pause where she fell. Grayson framed him, said he'd run off with her, and the village believed it. "And the blood on the keys?" she asked. "Grayson's. I lured him to the cottage, played the tune to taunt him. He lunged at me, and I used the letter opener. Self-defense at first. Then I saw red." His voice cracked. "I wanted him to feel what she felt." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "And the locket? John's. He gave it to her, and Grayson kept it as a trophy. I found it in his things when I broke into his house months ago. It's all I have left of them." Craddock stepped forward, but Miss Marple held up a hand. "One more question. The extra note, after the pause. Why?" Vincent's eyes darkened. "It's Grayson's scream. I added it for her." She stepped back, letting Craddock take over. Vincent's confession hung in the air, raw and jagged, the tune's truth laid bare. As they led him away, Miss Marple hummed Clara's lament, the pause now heavy with Clara's fall, the extra note a cry across time. Justice, she thought, was a complicated melody, one Vincent had played to its bitter end. Chapter 9. The Final Note. The barn's lantern light faded behind them as Miss Marple and Inspector Craddock stepped into the cool night air. Vincent's confession had unravelled the threads of vengeance and grief, but something nagged at her, a dissonance in the tune's resolution. She walked silently beside Craddock, her mind replaying Clara's lament, the pause, the extra note. It was too neat, too rehearsed. Vincent had given them a killer, but not the whole song. Back at her cottage, she declined Craddock's offer of a ride home, insisting the walk would clear her head. The mist had lifted, leaving the stars sharp against the sky. She hummed the melody, stopping at that pause, then the jarring note Vincent had added. Grayson's scream, he'd called it, but screams didn't linger. They faded. This note lingered, deliberate, like a signature. She sat by her fire, spreading the two music sheets side by side, hers from the attic, Vincent's torn one from the mill. The pencil scrawl caught her eye again. He lied. The mill knows. She'd assumed it meant Grayson. But what if Vincent had misread the past? What if the liar wasn't Harold Grayson's grandfather, but John Vincent himself? The next morning she rang Craddock. "Inspector, have you tested the knife from the mill yet? The blood?" "Preliminary results just came in," he replied. "Old blood, female, from the blade's grooves. Could be Clara's, but it's too degraded for a match." "Why?" "Because I think we've missed a note," she said. "Dig deeper at the mill, near the stream, where Tom saw blood, and check Vincent's story against John's letters. There's a twist we haven't played." Craddock sighed but agreed. By noon, his men were back at the mill, shovels sinking into the soft earth. Miss Marple joined them, standing at the stream's edge as they unearthed a shallow grave. Bones fragile and yellowed, wrapped in the remnants of a Victorian dress. A woman's skeleton, a stab wound clear in the ribs. Beside it, a rusted fiddle case, its latch broken. "Clara," Miss Marple murmured, her suspicion hardening. The letters arrived that afternoon, seized from Vincent's rented rooms in Much Benham. Craddock brought them to her cottage, his face grim. "You were right. John Vincent's words don't match his grandson's tale. He wrote Clara begged him to leave Grayson, but he refused, said she'd humiliated him by hesitating. The last entry. She played her lament, and I silenced it. The mill hides my shame." Miss Marple nodded, the final note falling into place. John killed her, not Grayson. The pause in the tune wasn't her fall, it was his betrayal. He stabbed her at the mill, buried her, and let Grayson take the blame. The extra note Vincent added, "It's not Grayson's scream, it's John's guilt, echoing through his grandson." Craddock frowned. Then why kill Grayson now? Vincent believed the lie John spun, that Grayson was the monster. He found the locket in Grayson's house, assumed it was a trophy, not a keepsake Clara left behind. Harold Grayson must have known the truth, perhaps threatened to expose it when Vincent confronted him. Revenge turned to murder, but Vincent was avenging a fiction. The inspector rubbed his temples. So John Vincent wrote the tune to confess, and his grandson played it to punish the wrong man. "Exactly," Miss Marple said, her voice soft. The song hid the killer's identity in plain sight. Not Grayson, but John. Vincent never saw it. Craddock left to amend the charges. Murder, yes, but driven by a twisted legacy. Miss Marple sat alone, humming Clara's lament one last time. The pause was Clara's plea, the extra note John's confession, and Vincent had played it, blind. The final twist wasn't in the killing, but in the tune itself, a melody that echoed a crime and a lie across a century. She folded the music sheets and placed them in her drawer, the fire crackling softly. "Poor Clara," she whispered, "your lament's been heard at last." Chapter 10. Harmony Restored. The days following Vincent's arrest brought a quiet clarity to St. Mary Mead, as if the village had exhaled after holding its breath too long. The mill's grim discovery, Clara Langston's remains, had stirred sympathy and hushed whispers, but also a sense of closure. Miss Marple sat in her garden, the April sun warming her shawl, a letter from Inspector Craddock open in her lap. Her roses nodded in the breeze, and for once her knitting lay forgotten. Craddock's note was brief but thorough. The bones had been confirmed as Clara's through dental records from an old Langston family archive. The knife bore traces of her blood, tying it to John Vincent's crime in 1898. The modern Vincent, John's grandson, had pleaded guilty to Harold Grayson's murder, his lawyer citing a mind clouded by obsession and a false family legend. The locket, now in evidence, would be returned to Clara's distant cousins once the case closed. "You saw it before I did, Miss Marple," Craddock had written. "That tune was the key all along." She smiled faintly, folding the letter. The tune had indeed been the key, not just to Clara's fate, but to the hearts of those who played it. John Vincent had woven his guilt into Clara's lament, a confession disguised as art. Hinakishio. Grandson had mistaken it for a call to vengeance, striking a discordant note that ended in tragedy. And Clara, the silent centre, had waited a century for her truth to be heard. Mrs. Bantry arrived for tea, her usual flurry tempered by the weight of the story. "Jane, you've outdone yourself," she said, settling into a wicker chair. "Poor Clara, buried all that time, and Vincent, both of them really, such a tangle of love and lies." "Love often tangles," Miss Marple replied, pouring tea. "But it's the lies that bind us tightest. John Vincent couldn't face his own shame, so he let Grayson carry it. His grandson paid the price for believing the echo." Dolly sighed, nibbling a scone. "What I don't understand is how you knew. The tune, I mean. That pause, the extra note. It's just music to me." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Music speaks, Dolly, if you listen. That pause was Clara's hesitation, her fear of leaving Grayson, her trust in John. The extra note was his betrayal, sharp and final. Young Vincent played it louder, thinking it was justice, but it was guilt, plain as day." Mrs. Bantry shook her head, marvelling. "You make it sound so simple." "Not simple," Miss Marple corrected, her voice soft. "Human." They sipped in companionable silence, the garden humming with bees. Later, Miss Marple walked to the churchyard, where Clara's remains had been laid to rest that morning. A small service, attended by a few villagers and a Langston cousin from London. The headstone was plain. Clara Langston, 1875–1898. Her song endures. Miss Marple placed a sprig of lavender on the grave, humming Clara's lament one last time. Not the version Vincent played, but the original, without the extra note. It felt lighter now, cleansed of its burden. Back home, she lit her fire and took up her knitting, the needles clicking in time with her thoughts. St. Mary Mead would gossip for weeks. Mrs. Price already had a theory about Vincent hiding in France, but the village's rhythm would return. It always did. Clara's truth had restored a balance, however fragile, and Miss Marple was content to let the melody fade. As dusk settled, a breeze carried the faint chime of the church bell, pure and clear. She paused, listening, and smiled. "Harmony at last," she murmured, and turned her attention to the next stitch.